But anyways, I want to now move on to the second topic, that being the Maxx Crosby trade, or the failure of the would-be trade. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up, obviously this was a couple weeks ago that this happened, but if you weren't familiar, or you haven't been paying attention to NFL offseason news too much, of course, when we came into the offseason, it was pretty clear when the regular season ended, things kind of fell apart between the Raiders and Maxx Crosby. Maxx Crosby was dealing with an injury towards the end of the season. We know he actually, it's been pretty well documented and talked about now, but was playing through a torn meniscus, I believe, if I'm remembering right, for a few weeks towards the end of the season. And reportedly, Crosby was fighting through that for quite a while. And I believe it was in the last 2 or so weeks of the season, the Raiders decided to shut him down for the season and say, hey, we're going to bench you. We want to, the thought process being, hey, we want to start your offseason sooner, get you rehabbing. We don't want you getting extra hurt on an already lost season. This is obviously lost season for us. Like, you're way too valuable to this team. We want to sit you so that we can, protect you for going forward for us. Again, that rubbed Crosby the wrong way, which I do respect. He's a football player that loves football, wants to fight through it. Again, he had been playing through this same injury for already a few weeks, and that's part of what he's openly talked about. Part of what frustrated him was that they allowed him to play through it for a while and fight through it. But once the team, once the front office fully had given up on trying to win anything, basically trying to tank, they wanted to shut him down. But Crosby's not interested in that. Still wants to be out there fighting first guys, getting sacks, that kind of thing, and playing the game. So it rubbed him the wrong way. And so going into January, Maxx Crosby made it pretty well known that he wanted a trade. And when as we started going through the offseason, at first the messaging from the Raiders was that they didn't want to trade Crosby. They weren't gonna do it. They weren't gonna listen to offers. But then, of course, as we got closer to February, got closer to the combine, word started coming out that, okay, sure, since Crosby seems that insistent that he's done being a Raider, he's tired of not happy with how things ended in 2025, he wants out. Okay, fine, we'll start listening to offers. So then, reports were that the Raiders, of course, started getting tons of interest from around the league. Some of those teams being the Ravens, the Cowboys, the Bears, and some others. But those are the top 3 teams that got talked about the most around NFL circles as being interested, and also just fan speculation for where Crosby could go. And so, of course, at the Combine, it's no secret, NFL agents and GMs, coaches, they get together at the Combine. Half of the reason for the Combine these days is to negotiate contracts and trades for players that are already in the league. The Combine's great and all. Obviously, it does still have somewhat of a purpose for scouting draft prospects, but honestly, these days, a lot of the times, especially for the top prospects, a lot of them don't even participate in most of the stuff at the Combine. That there's the physicals that are important. That's still there. There's the interviews, but a lot of players come into the league now so coached up for the interviews that happen at the Combine that those almost don't matter. And then, as far as the on-field stuff, a lot of guys don't participate in that stuff, and they maybe just do their pro day with their school, which, a lot of times those pro days even are kind of, geared towards making that player look good. And so, anyways, the not-so-secret side purpose of the Combine is that it's there for, top people in the league and agents to get together and start negotiating deals even before it's technically legal to be negotiating deals. And so at the combine, deals started going, and then March 5th on a Friday, March 6th on a Friday, it was announced that the Raiders and the Ravens had agreed to a trade that would send Maxx Crosby to the Ravens in exchange for the first round pick this year, which I believe was going to be the 20th overall pick, and then first round pick in 2027. So it was 2 first round picks this year, next year, and then the Ravens would get Maxx Crosby. So that was the announced deal. Now that was Friday of March 6th. And for context on the NFL season schedule and timeline, March 9th on Monday started what is called sort of the NFL negotiating window. This is the period. It's a 2-day window from a certain time on Monday, basically Monday morning, until 4 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. That 2-day-ish period is known as the legal negotiating window, where teams can start negotiating with free agents and things like that. And then official contracts and deals, so this can include trades, those aren't able to be made official until the beginning of the NFL new league year. So this year, the NFL new year was on Wednesday, March 11th. So at that moment, once the NFL league year starts, then you can make free agency deals that have been announced. And, first of all, that's when free agency officially starts, is at the beginning of the new year. So Wednesday afternoon, that's when NFL free agency officially starts. However, the way this NFL negotiating period, this legal negotiating period works, it's kind of weird. Because again, the idea behind it is that, okay, you give 2 days for teams and for agents to coordinate, figure things out, so that then by the time free agency starts, people can start signing and it's not frantic. But really all it does is instead, the franticness just ends up being at the beginning of the negotiating window, and that's when, even before things become official, that's when things start getting leaked or really just reported out to the different insiders, Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, Tom Pelissero, all those. Monday is when the frenzy of free agency starts happening of, this team has signed this player and this team has signed this player. When those announcements get put out, by ESPN or whatever, and you see those headlines, that's not necessarily that signing is official yet. That's just an announcement of, hey, this is the deal that the team and this following player have agreed to. It's not in writing yet. It's not official, but this is what they're planning on agreeing to. And that's pending, with all trades and free agency acquisitions. There is, of course, a physical involved that's generally a given to need to be passed before a deal gets made. But again, these deals can't be made official until free agency and the new NFL league year actually starts. So it's a little weird and kind of deceptive the way the media and some of these insiders report some of these things. It makes it sound like these deals are permanent, or it makes it sound like these deals are official already when they're not. Now, yes, for the most part, these deals, when they get announced, if they get announced, it's because it's pretty likely it's going to go through. But as we saw with Maxx Crosby, that was not the case with this trade. So what ended up happening Again, the trade was announced Friday, March 6th, before the negotiating window. That's fine because this is a trade. But so again, this deal gets announced by the media and by the two teams on March 6th, on Friday. And then Monday rolls around. That's the beginning of the negotiating window. I believe it's on Monday. Maxx Crosby was in Baltimore at the facilities, taking care of the physical, that kind of stuff. Was in Baltimore Monday and Tuesday. And then it comes out Tuesday afternoon. It's announced by the Raiders by a statement that they posted on social media where they just said, the Baltimore Ravens have backed out of our trade agreement for Maxx Crosby. We have no further comment at this time. And I made a shorts video on it, but it was pretty just abrupt. It very much gave off the vibe that, okay, obviously something went down here. Does not sound like the Raiders are happy with whatever went down here. It ended up being reported that, of course, it did come down to the physical. Maxx Crosby did fail the physical for this knee and for this meniscus repair that he's going through. And at first the controversy was, okay, well, what the heck is going on? Like, everyone knew, it was pretty well reported that Crosby underwent surgery at the beginning, towards the end of 2025. That was the whole reason there was drama with the Raiders in the first place, was because they made him sit, didn't play him those last weeks, and had him start the surgery and the recovery process a little early. So that was pretty common knowledge that he had that surgery, and so also should be pretty common knowledge that he was going to be going through rehab and that sort of thing this offseason with the goal of coming back early in 2026. So it was like, all right, that shouldn't be a surprise. What's going on here? There was also reports that people around the league, other GMs and stuff like that, were kind of confused, kind of surprised that the Ravens would have agreed to this deal and then backed out. But the reasoning that the Ravens have since explained was that it was indeed due to the physical, and it's not so much that they didn't know that he had, issues with his knee, but the findings that they got and the things that stuck out to them with the examination of his knee is they have concerns more so about the long-term ramifications of his knee, and they worry that Maxx Crosby is going to be dealing with a degenerative knee, and so giving up 2 first-round picks, one this year, one next year. You've got a new head coach. You've already got a Lamar Jackson, veteran quarterback, who's negotiating for another contract. Obviously, if you were going to bring in Crosby, quite possible he would have wanted a new contract, a slightly restructured contract. And so to give up 2 first-round picks for that within the next couple years, those 2 first-round draft picks, I mean, the draft is a gamble, of course, but first-round picks, those are players that you expect to be starters at the very least. And obviously, we have busts every year, but 2 first-round draft picks, the chances that at least one of those players comes in and, signs a 4-year deal, a 5-year deal, and plays out at least that 4 or 5 years for the Ravens and does decently well. 1 out of those 2 draft picks hitting and being a 4 or 5 year thing for the Ravens, which that's long term for the NFL. That's just too high of a possibility, and especially also that again, you get these rookies for cheap. That's a lot to give up for Maxx Crosby if you are indeed concerned about his long term ability to play. Crosby's not old by NFL standards, but he's definitely at the age where he's not a young player anymore. He's not a new player or anything. So I don't totally blame the Ravens for changing their mind there. I do still think it's a little weird. Again, there's a reason that these insiders and that all the media covering the NFL so confidently is able to announce these deals during the negotiating window before they've actually been made official when free agency actually starts, is because 99% of the time, especially with the big name trades and free agent deals, generally if those get, generally if the teams give that information to the insiders and say, go ahead and post this, most of the time that's going through, it's going to work out. Again, like large majority of the time, it's going to work out. It rarely doesn't. This was just one of the cases, and with a blockbuster trade where it did not end up working out. So since then, after the trade fell through, at first there was some reporting, around that same week there was kind of some conflicting reporting. Some insiders were reporting that the Raiders were once again getting tons of offers, and then there was some reporting that was saying that they weren't getting near the same level of interest as they had been before the Ravens deal was a thing. So, because again, before the Raiders and Ravens deal was announced, it was discussed that the Cowboys were interested, the Bears were interested. Again, there was 2 or 3, 4 other teams that were reported to be pretty interested in trying to go for Crosby. But again, the thing is the Raiders were asking pretty much demanding a minimum price of 2 first-round picks, and it sounds like the Ravens were really the only team that were at first willing to go with that idea. And it is quite possible that over the process of going through that, they also did land Trey Hendrickson from the Bengals, and for a minute there was some speculation of, wait a minute, and that was another reason why some people were a little suspicious of the Ravens backing out of this. Wait a minute, are they just using the meniscus as an excuse? Did they just get Trey Hendrickson and they decided now they're good on, at pass rusher, big veteran pass rusher? Did they just decide that they're good and they got cold feet about the 2 first-round picks, and so now they're using the knee as an excuse? But at least according to the general manager for the Ravens, they were genuinely trying to actually get Maxx Crosby and Trey Hendrickson. So, and he did genuinely, if you watched the press conferences and stuff when he talked about it, did sound genuinely bummed that they didn't land Maxx Crosby and that they weren't able to work that out. But yeah, it was just interesting. But again, as far as whether or not there was actually much efforts after this trade fell out, whether or not there were actually any real efforts by other teams to reach back out to the Raiders, I'm not 100% sure on the truth of that. But regardless, nothing's come about of it. And really in the last week or so, the reporting has kind of switched to, sounds like, after the whole experience for Crosby, he's kind of softened again on the idea of, okay, I'm down to stay being a Raider. Maybe I don't want to get traded that bad after my experience of, the whiplash of, he had a post thanking Raider Nation, saying, let's go Ravens, that kind of thing. He went to Baltimore, thought he was going to be a Raven for a second, and then, nope, sorry, you're a Raider again. So from there, it sounds like, Crosby's talked about, at least for him mentally, he's kind of back to, hey, I'm a Raider. I want to stay a Raider. Let's go. I'm focusing on my rehab. This is what I want to do. And again, for the Raiders, they didn't even necessarily really on their end really want to trade Crosby in the first place. They more so were just doing it because they, sort of out of a necessity because of Crosby demanding it, and because, if you could get the right price, then you take it. But It sounds like most likely Crosby is going to be staying with the Raiders going into 2026. Which certainly could be good for them. However, as a result of all this, again, not much concrete is out there as far as what all the other teams were actually offering. Again, the Raiders were demanding 2 first-round picks, which was a price that sounds like it was, felt pretty high for most teams. So much so that a lot just backed out, but from that price. But one of the team that was reportedly, probably second behind the Ravens was the Cowboys as far as being interested in Maxx Crosby. And we do actually have the details on 3 trade offers that they made to the Raiders for Maxx Crosby that obviously didn't go through. So the first offer they made was, one of the offers they made was 2026 20th overall pick and defensive tackle Osa Odigizua. And then the second would have been the 2026 12th overall pick and a 2027 third round pick. And then the final offer was going to be and again, I say final, but just the last of the 3 I'm bringing up. I don't know necessarily the order that they brought up these offers or anything like that, but these were just 3 offers that the Cowboys have, openly said they offered to the Raiders. The final one being 2026 20th overall pick and a 2027 second round pick. So again, with 2026, the Cowboys do have 2 first round picks, the 12th and the 20th overall. So again, they kind of between those 3 deals kind of switched off between those, and then it was a 2027 second or third round pick or Osa Odigizua, basically valuing him as a second, third round pick level player, which feels fair enough. But yeah, so those were the 3 offers that the Cowboys made. Obviously makes sense why, Ravens actually did come to the table with the price that the Raiders had asked for, 2 first round picks. So that's why the Raiders tried to go with the Ravens deal for those 2 first round picks. But I don't know how much the Cowboys tried again with those same offers after the Raiders thing. I don't know for sure on that, but regardless, it's not happened. I don't really see at this point Maxx Crosby getting traded. A lot of those teams now have kind of pivoted in other directions now, at least as far as reported plans. So I don't see. I think we'll see Maxx Crosby on the Raiders again in 2025, which will be good for the Raiders. The Raiders already, even without those 2 first-round picks, they've got a lot of draft capital this year, coming years. They've got a lot of draft capital that, decent amount of cap space as well. A lot of needs, of course. One of the worst teams in the league in the last few years. One of the most playoff-starved teams in the league and in American sports, really. They've been in the wilderness for a while, so they've got a lot of needs, but the obvious one is that the Raiders are going to draft Mendoza with the first overall pick. I don't think it's, some media personalities are debating that about whether or not Mendoza should be picked first overall. You can have whatever opinion you want of Mendoza versus Simpson for who's the number 1 quarterback in this draft, but say whatever you want. It's going to be Mendoza that gets drafted first overall in this draft, and it's going to be the Raiders that draft him. So, for the Raiders, you got a new head coach. You're going to have Mendoza, you're going to have, you got Ashton Genty back there at running back who, did have a disappointing 2025 season, but part of that was having a really disappointing offensive line in 2025. So, that's an area, if you can improve that offensive line, get good young quarterback play out of Mendoza, get Ashton Genty going, keep Maxx Crosby as a top of the line pass rusher and a veteran presence on the defense. The Raiders could certainly be improved, which that's not a very high standard to be improved from where they have been. But keeping Crosby makes sense for the Raiders to want to do that. They've already got a good amount of draft capital. They don't necessarily need a ton more picks.